It's like, okay, well, if we don't fit into this perfect box, right, of what sex is or sex is not, then it's like there's so much shame that comes out of that. People feel broken. People feel like there's something wrong with them. And no wonder. It's like we've created this culture where people are so scared to speak out, right, and speak up about, hey, I want to have a better sex life.
How's it going, everyone? Welcome to Love, Laughs, and Lessons. And I'm Dr. Frankie.
And I'm Denise Ray. And today's guest is Dr. Diane, also known as the Libido Doc. She's a board-certified sexologist with dual doctorates in naturopathic medicine and acupuncture, as well as oriental medicine. She's also the founder of mylibidodoc.com, a sex education platform for women and couples, and the host of the Libido Lounge podcast. Dr. Diane works with monogamous couples who feel like the spark has dimmed, whether it's sex, desire, or emotional connection. Her work helps people understand how to reignite that fire with better communication, deeper intimacy, and lots of hot sex. So.
Thank you for that fabulous intro. And I'm just so glad we're talking about this. You know, there's so many crazy statistics out there. Like the one I read said in a survey that 69% of people wanted to talk to their doctors about sex, but don't. Like that to me is like so important to know, right? Like how many people are actually like really just looking to have this conversation, but hold it in. I think hold it in not only from their doctors and therapists, but also from their partner. So thanks for having me. I think this is so important.
Well, thank you for doing this work. We couldn't agree more. So I'm just going to throw this out there, like desire. I'm so curious. How do you maintain that? Keep it going in relationship? How do you fuel it?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite questions. And to answer this, I really like looking at brain chemistry. You know, I'm a total nerd scientist at heart. And when we're looking at desire, like when desire is natural and easy in a relationship, like, well, when is that? Usually that's when we're in that like new relationship energy, you know, time period between beginning, and usually that fades out for most people by about month 18. So then we have to take a step back and say, well, what's going on? You know, what is really feeding that? And a main brain chemical that is related to desire is dopamine. And so people have heard of dopamine sometimes, like there's more evidence and more coming out around dopamine and addiction. For example, our phones, you know, like doom scrolling or scrolling all day on anything, and we get all these dopamine hits. But what a lot of people don't realize about dopamine is basically our motivator hormone as well as our reward hormone. So when we're in that new relationship energy, what is happening is we have all this space and this unknown. So it's like, are they going to call me? Are we going to have a date? And we have a date and then it's like, are we going to kiss? And then we have another date and it's like, well, are they going to text me and ask me out again? Or then are we going to make love? Or in all the phases, right? And anytime we start to have that thought of, are they going to call? Are they going to text? Are we going to kiss, etc.? We're actually being driven towards that activity, if we want it, with the chemical dopamine. So it's like kind of motivating us to take action to get that thing. And then when they do call, or when we do have our first kiss, or we do make love for the first time, then not only have we had this kind of slow drip of dopamine, but then we have this reward, this like boost of it. And then there's a reset, right? Because then in the beginning, it's like, well, when are we going to see each other next? When's our first vacation? And the cycle continues and continues and continues until we reach that point, you know, oftentimes, like I said, 18 months in or sooner, where everything just becomes like a little more habit and normal. And then eventually, at some point, most people move in together, at least share keys to each other's houses, sometimes get married, have kids, all the things, of course. And when these things happen, and now we're in this point where it's like, well, we're not thinking about when are we going to do this thing because that person's always around or we always have access to it. So we've like taken out that dopamine system in our long-term relationships. So the answer that I have found to really keeping that desire up is finding ways to bring that dopamine back in.
Mm-hmm.
You want me to talk about how?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause this is a question we get often in coaching. It's like, how do we, and we're working with
How do we
couples,
keep it going?
Yeah.
how do we keep
Yeah.
it going?
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's something I'm going to say here, which I imagine in working with couples, you guys have talked about this before too, which is like scheduling sex. And I'm going to bring this into dopamine and how we can use scheduling sex in a different way. But a lot of times when people say, hey, let's schedule sex, I don't know about you, but the reaction I get oftentimes is like, well, I don't want to do that. That sounds like not hot and not spontaneous. And I was looking to add things hot. Or
Yeah,
make
not
things hot
sexy.
again, right? Not sexy. And what's interesting, if we go back to the new relationship energy, and this is what I counsel people to do in my courses and trainings, is if we go back to that new relationship energy and we're looking at what we were doing, we're making dates, we're putting it on our calendar. We are, making it special. We're putting on our lingerie. We are doing whatever we need to do to kind of get in the mood for sexy time. And in a lot of ways, it's actually scheduled. It's on our calendar. We're putting our time aside. So what's fascinating is once we get to like that 18-month mark, once we get to wherever that time period is where we combine our lives, when dopamine goes down, that's also around when we stop scheduling sex. And then when we say scheduling sex, and it's like, well, I don't want to do that. That's not hot. But actually, we've been doing it all along. And when it actually got not hot is usually around the time that we've been so integrated that we don't schedule. So, and I'm not saying by this either that we need to schedule all the time, but I'm using this as a way to create dopamine. So here's how it creates dopamine is because anytime we bring something new in, and I'm going to give your audience my yes, no, maybe checklist because it's a great way to stimulate ideas on newness. So we'll give that to them. But the idea with newness is anytime we bring something new in, anything from changing a room to putting a wig on to playing with toys or so many more things, anytime we're doing that, that is going to create some level of dopamine because it's, again, back to the, are they going to kiss or are we going to do this? But the way that we really start with that dopamine system is we start talking about it and planning about it because what we're doing is we're actually making our brain crave it. So if we say, oh, okay, well, we're going to have novelty sex date on Friday and we're going to try out this new thing. Then what we want to do is all week long, we can start to flirt again, right? Which a lot of people are not flirting anymore. Flirting is like way something that we used to do. And like now it's not part of so many people's relationships. Right. But it gives people something to flirt around like, wow, I'm so excited for that hot thing we're going to try. And what are you going to wear? And we can start to play this game of flirting. What that's doing is that setting that dopamine up for that newness and that unknown. So again, that's motivation. We've never tried this. What is that going to be like? I'm a little scared. I'm a little excited. And then when we get to that day and we get that reward, that's back to dopamine. So that's one. I have other ideas for you as well, but that's one of the huge things that I've seen with driving desire is we have to have that motivation towards that newness. And I work, with monogamous couples. So my work, some people bring in other couples and do that. And that's, their prerogative, of course. But in my work, I'm always trying to figure out like, okay, for people who want to keep it closed, how do we bring that newness in, right? And so then when we do that, we're creating that drive, we get the reward and there's enough space. It's not like, oh, we're just going to try something new every day. I'm going to, run out of ideas really fast. But it's going to instead be like, okay, well, how do we do this and we think about this all week and we flirt about this all week and we play with this idea all week, right? And bring the desire back through that creation of the space because that is dopamine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's not just this idea of thinking about how to be creative and make sure it's something new. Because it's true. I'm thinking like eventually you run out of ideas.
Right. Yep, exactly. And then if you have enough ideas though, so it's like if you're doing this and you're, creating space, if you have enough ideas, what tends to happen for most of us with anything, it's like, think about cooking and you can learn a new recipe and you can like start eating it all the time. And it's like, oh, I got to cook that thing again. It's like, well, now I'm a little burnt out. And so now that goes to the back of like the recipe book, the back of my mind, my mind. And then like 8 months go by and it's like, oh yeah, remember that thing. And so it's like, if we're rotating through these ideas enough, we can create enough ideas where things are like still feel like new and novel because now there's been enough space to make that thing exciting. It's just when we start to eat the same food, if we have, my favorite food is steak. And as much as I love steak, if I ate it breakfast, noon, and night, and I actually tried that once. I tried to eat steak every meal for an entire week. And it was like, I couldn't even make it, and it's my favorite food, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. It's like when we create that space between the novelty, then it still creates this level of like, oh, right, that hot thing. I forgot about that hot thing. Let's go back and do that hot thing. But we have to have enough hot things to rotate through them that work not only for us, but are also interesting for our partner as well. So that's part of the trick too, of course, is finding something that's going to be hot for both individuals and getting them on the same page.
So what are the concerns that couples come in with? The most common ones?
A real common one comes in with like things like sex toys, for example, and like the idea of like vibrator addiction is a big one. So are you talking about like when we're bringing in novelty, or are you talking about bigger picture?
In general, like what you're seeing.
In general, low sex drive, desire mismatch, which usually in a hetero relationship is going to be more commonly he's more interested than she is. Can work other ways as well. But that desire mismatch of one person being so much more interested in the relationship, or not in the relationship, in sex than another. Another thing is pelvic pain, the changes that happen with menopause, andropause. Sometimes it's like body image changes. Like, sometimes I'll hear people say, well, I can't have sex until I lose 15 pounds, which is insane. Genital image comes up sometimes. Like, how am I supposed to look there? Right. So it's usually some level of something's going on with me, or I can't orgasm is one that comes up, especially for women. I can't last long is one that comes up for men. So it's usually something like oriented to like the individual of like, okay, there's something wrong with me is how, some people feel. Or, hey, we can't seem to get in alignment. We can't connect. We tried talking about it. It didn't go well. Those are the most common things.
And you just said something a minute ago, which is the vibrator addiction. Is that one? Let's say more about that.
Yeah. So that's like when in the conversation around novelty, like I talk a lot about a lot of different toys, right, that we can use. And there's so many fun toys out there, but vibrators, especially for women, I find women going through midlife changes. I mean, I think vibrators are just like an essential part of every woman's self-care plan. But especially true at midlife, because as the pelvic floor starts changing and as we start losing the level of estrogen, and we see that our muscles don't stretch and don't relax in the same sort of way, vibrators have actually shown to improve that, to improve dysfunction. In fact, one study showed that a 3-time-a-week use by women with pelvic pain, so 3 times a week use for 12 weeks, had a 5x reduction in pelvic pain in the way they relate. So it's like pretty major improvements just from using that, right? And so we're seeing that like that tension that gets held in the pelvic floor, or numbness that often happens sometimes, post childbirth, that has just lingered for years, or numbness even due to hormonal changes, can really make a difference with vibrators. And there's one company, Plus One, that is making this menopause massager. And there's other companies like that do a similar thing and that heat up. And it's like, okay, so you combine heat then with something like this, and talk about like internal muscle relaxing. And like, I'm even seeing like jaw tension go away, like, because sometimes jaw tension is connected to pelvic floor tension. So it's like so many health benefits that come with this, which is amazing. And sometimes when people have not brought this into their sexual experience, there's a concern that, am I going to be addicted to it? Sometimes their partners are worried that it's going to replace them, right? That can come up. And this is like, couldn't be further from the truth. Like that was concern for a little while around the addiction. Now we see if there's like really heavy stimulation and a lot of, like the frequency and the intensity is really high. Sometimes there'll be like a refractory period where the nerves have to reset itself a few minutes, maybe a bit longer, maybe up to an hour in a rare case. But then everything is just the same, right? So it's like there's not an addiction. It's not like you're going to use this one day and now you need to vibrate or to have an orgasm. And the idea that this is going to replace a partner is, it can be scary. Like I get why that's like, a lot of things are scary and we don't know. But what we actually find is that many people feel that it closes orgasm gaps if one partner is orgasming more easily than another person. that it actually increases pleasure and sensation so much that a lot of times then people are combining this with their other sexual acts and finding that it's actually adding to a greater sexual experience. And we just need to get away, I think, from this belief that we are destined to please a partner in this one way, and this one way is superior to all the other ways around, and really, I think, change our orientation to, as humans and as lovers, how great is it that we get to provide pleasure to somebody we love? And how great is it that we can find all of these different ways to expand orgasms in so many ways versus like, this is the one way. And if I don't do this, I'm not a good lover.
And this idea where there's a stigma or judgment if somebody, needs to use a vibrator to actually climax more easily so it doesn't take so long.
Right.
For women, it's often, it takes that kind of stimulation. Otherwise, it can take a really long time and be tough on our partners, our sex partners.
Or it leads to faking, which is never a good idea.
Right? Yeah. So it's like, but there's this judgment or stigma around like, well, she can't orgasm without some artificial, tool.
Yeah. There's judgments from both people. There's judgments from like the giver. There's judgments from like the receiver, right? I think so many women feel so broken. And that's why like surveys and stats I think are so important to just like normalize this. Like it's estimated, depending upon the study that you see, that only between 18 to 30% of women can actually orgasm from penetration alone.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like that means the majority of women cannot. And, so when we're doing this, it's like, well, this is really cool if a woman's able to do that, but that's more in the abnormal, not abnormal bad, but just like less common, right? That's just more or less, that's in that less common. And some of it we know is just based upon the difference of the anatomy between where the clitoris lies and where the vaginal open is, that the larger that distance between the clitoris and the vaginal opening, the more likely she is not able to orgasm from penetration, right? So it's like, wow, this is just anatomy. Like, this is all this is. And, sadly, like, we're still in this world that is still influenced by, psychologists like Freud, like Sigmund Freud. And Freud just did, I think, some real big problems to the sexual health movement. One of the things that I have seen him quoted as saying is that a woman or a girl, I should say, when she reaches menarche, when she reaches her first period, she is supposed to change at that point from getting all of her pleasure from the clitoris to all of her pleasure from the vagina. And if she cannot change over as soon as she menstruates, she is frigid. Like,
right.
What?
Yeah. What's really crazy about that, it's so black and white. Like there's such a range in presentation and experience. Like we all arrive at different times and we all present in different ways. And like it's just so limiting.
It is. And it's like, okay, well, if we don't fit into this perfect box, right, of what sex is or sex is not, then it's like there's so much shame that comes out of that. People feel broken. People feel like there's something wrong with them. And no wonder it's like we've created this culture where people are so scared to speak out, right? And speak up about, hey, I want to have a better sex life. And how do I do it? And no wonder we're at a point where that's so scary to do, because we're still in this point where a lot of people really have that programming of being in a box, or sadly, due to, the movie industry and the porn industry, the number of times, like, it's like insane to me, the number of times like we can see in the movie industry some sort of like scene, and as a super hot scene, and somebody's clothes are getting ripped off, and then there's like 2 minutes of a sexual act and everybody is orgasming and having the best time in like 2 minutes or less. So if we're not, as women, especially if we're not reaching that height of orgasm, and men are not providing to women, or women are not providing to their other women, like that level of pleasure in 2 minutes or less, like we're like left to think, well, what is wrong? It's just awful.
Yeah.
I mean, what we see out there is not actually really what creates pleasure,
right,
and safety and curiosity. It's very like, I don't know. It seems very like quick, like you said. Also, there's a lot of stuff in porn that many people don't want to do. They don't find that. So this younger generation, they're watching. I think about that. I've got 20-year-old twins. I'm like, I've told them, like, don't look at porn and think that's what your partner wants necessarily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. It's so true. It's like, okay, like this is how you see somebody touched in a certain way and spanked in a certain way or whatever it is and moved in a certain way. And it's like another thing that we see statistically speaking is that if you like in surveys of couples that report having the healthiest, happiest sex lives, 92% of the time they talk about it. And why are they talking about it? Because exactly like that, because the moment we start to say, like, we know what sex is based upon our external environment, we are really, really, really mistaken because even throughout my life, and this is what I see in others that I work with, is that it changes our wants, our needs, our preferences, our desires, not only are so individualistic, but they change throughout our lives. And so what feels good and what's interesting at 20 is going to be different at 30, 40, 50, 60 and beyond.
And no two people are the same. So if your ex liked it this way, doesn't mean this new person wants it the same way. In fact, it's unlikely that they're going to want it the same way. They're going to want different things.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most harmful things we can do from a standpoint of like sexual expression is like bring something from a past relationship in and just assume that's how our partner wants it. Now, it's a beautiful thing, right? We've had different sexual partners and we can draw on different experiences like that can make us, more rounded in many ways. But at the same time, I think we have to be very careful to say, okay, well, just because I had success with this technique over here does not mean that same technique is going to have any success over there. And we see this with menstruating women too, like different times of the month, right? Different times of the month, different parts of the body are going to want different styles of touch. Some parts of the body might not be interesting in touch at some certain points of the month. And so we can even see that rotation there. So it's like, it's one of the key reasons why we have to build this foundation of this muscle in our relationships of talking about this, because I think that's another thing. It's like another reason, and back to the original question of desire, another reason why I think desire really goes down in these long-term relationships is that we're not talking about it. And so people are innately, bored. And beyond the novelty thing, it's like people are like in these situations where not only is it like they might be bored with the thing, but it's not even feeling good to them. And if we don't have that type of conversation to be like, oh, a little to the right, honey, a little to the left, and be able to work with that in real time, we're probably going to be really falling short. And if it's not feeling that great, if it's just like, nah, that was okay, doesn't feel that great, well, who's going to be motivated? Who's going to have the desire to go back and seek that out again?
Yeah, it's true. So communication is key. I'm hearing that. Being creative, flirting. And flirting is hard for a lot of people. They feel silly. They don't know what to say. They don't, right? That's what I hear in my office. It's like, I don't know how to flirt. I don't know how to sext. I don't know how to be sexy. My words, I feel stupid or silly. So what's your recommendation when somebody just doesn't, they don't know?
Like, yes to all of that. I think there's a level, right? When it's like, if you go back to like teenage years when we were all trying to figure this out, like, I don't know about you, but I definitely was like feeling awkward then. So it's like, I think at some level, anytime we are flirting, we are in some ways, we're putting ourselves out there as a way, like as a potential to be rejected, even with our partner.
Yes.
Right. And it can feel this, like there can be this like immediate mirror of self-judgment that comes down and be like, was that too much? Am I too much? Or like, was that hot enough? Or is that awkward? That was kind of weird, right? Like all the words that can go on in our head. And, in my experience is like, no matter how much I practice this, especially with sexting, there's still a part of me that like, I still feel like sometimes awkward around like, was that hot? Like, I don't know. Did I get that one right? So my experience personally has been that never 100% goes away, but that just is like part of like accepting around like, oh, okay, well, that was a little scary. I feel a little weird. But what I think was most important about this is entry to say, let's start flirting again with some say ground rules around this. And by ground rules, the biggest thing, what I mean is we have to realize that as adults, right? We're so busy. And sometimes I can get like a sexy text from my partner and it like flashes across my screen and I could be on a podcast or I could be with a client. It's like, I can't even let it enter my brain. Like I can't even process that. So then he's out there like in la la land, just like send it this flurry. And now sometimes with my schedule, it can be hours before I can have like a moment to like get to my phone to like respond. Right. So I think it's really important that we have some like ground rules ahead of time of like, okay, well, what do you need when I'm busy? And what happens if I leave you hanging? And how's this going to be? And the more we talk about that around in advance to say like, hey, if I left you hanging, for 5 hours or whatnot, this does not mean, this is what it means. And saying that in advance to stop the monkey mind and stop the stories of like, oh my gosh, I feel awkward. Like, what are they like? Oh, that was too embarrassing. Now they're embarrassed. Now they're not going to respond. And just like stop all that monkey mind. I also think we need to talk because like the other thing that can happen is like, okay, well, 5 hours goes by and we can intend to get back to that person and then we forget, right? Like that can happen, right? Because the day goes on and we have a bazillion things. So it's like, what is the plan if it's like 5 hours and all of a sudden you haven't heard and now it's the end of the day and you're seeing each other for dinner and your partner is totally forgotten, right? How do we handle those situations? So the more I've seen that as we bring this in, we can plan for those things in advance and say like, okay, this is the plan of how we're going to deal with this. And if it comes up and you haven't, said anything, this is how I'm going to remind you about it later. And this is how you can respond to me. And I think that's where this goes many times the most strong is when there's no plan. But as far as like, the awkwardness, and I hear the same thing oftentimes when couples have gone months or years without like kissing much or having sex, right? It's like, oh gosh, it's like we try, it was so awkward. And, there's still moments with my partner, like most of the time it's not awkward in bed, but every once in a while we have an awkward moment. We'll bang heads, like we'll fall off the bed, like, something weird will happen. And so these moments where that happens, I think there's just times of like actually like laughing about it and not taking it so silly and not self-judging and all that. But we have a lot of like, I bring a lot of like laughter and lightness into my sex life. And I found that to help so much with those kind of awkward moments of like not taking it so seriously.
Yeah.
And accepting that, yeah, it's going to feel awkward sometimes and just being okay with it and doing it anyways.
Yeah. I think
and maybe acknowledging that it's just gonna be.
That's right.
Times.
There's such a crazy strive for this perfection, right? That we're trying to look so perfect or be so perfect or receive it so perfectly or give it so perfectly that, we just take the edge off and just be.
I think also the idea that like, okay, we can all relate to the fear of rejection and being vulnerable and sounding stupid or silly when we're trying to be flirty and sexy. So I think a ground rule is that like, if we get a text like that or a voice memo like that or whatever communication that we do our very best to not to pay extra attention so that person isn't left on red for 6 hours.
100%. Like that is my absolute other piece of advice of like, if you see it and you're not in a meeting, you're not in something where it's like, this is just like, I'm not going to respond to him when I'm talking to you, and we're doing this podcast, right? Like that's not respectful to the podcast. But in a normal day, if I'm just on my email or something like that, if like, okay, here's something that comes through, if I'm working on my book and anything like that it's like, I'm not with another human, I'm going to take a moment, even if it's disruptive to my flow, and I'm going to actually respond to him right away for that exact reason. Like if I'll see it, see some things that come through when I'm running sometimes. And if I'm sprinting, I'll finish my sprint. But before I do take off again, I'm going to take a moment and actually respond to him right then and there because I don't want to forget. And and sometimes the other thing that I think like where I've seen this go wrong is where people play like, like the Me Too game where it's like, oh, like they say something sexy and then you're like, oh yeah, baby, me too. Like as a response, like I'd really encourage you to, like come up with something that is more than me too, because whoever initiated the text, it's like they put themselves out there. It's like put themselves in a vulnerable position. And me too, just like that. Well, one is going to stop that flirting right away, right? Because like there's nothing more. It's like not giving anything to build.
Mhm.
And the fun part of flirting is building that intensity and building that energy. So, a really great way, like a lovely way you can bring this in is actually a way that I also tell people to work within the foundation of their overarching communication. So when we're communicating about sex, we do have to talk about the things that like we don't like, or maybe we used to like and we don't anymore, etc. But usually I don't recommend people start there because we all have a natural tendency when we're talking to our partner about sex to protect our own ego, because we all tend to, as humans, have a natural tendency to want to provide love and pleasure. There's like this human subconscious motivator, driver for that. So when we're talking about sex for the first time, if we hear something that we need to be doing different, it's so easy for us to just like shut down
Mhm.
and put our guard up and not really hear the other person and go immediately on the defensive, which then shuts down the conversation. I've seen these things where one conversation and all of a sudden it's like, well, that didn't work. We're never talking about sex again, gets swept under the rug, never to be heard of again. So the foundational skill here and like the skill stacking set for learning how to communicate, the foundational skill is talking about all the things that we love and being really specific about them. Meaning like, okay, hand on your thigh, like the way your breasts were, caressed, the way your lips were kissed, like the more specific you can be, the better. So if you're like, I don't know what to say, I don't know what to flirt about, that's a real like start flirting and saying things that are actually this foundational cornerstone of communication around, oh, I love this thing. Like, I can't get this out of my mind, that thing you did, and be super, super, super specific. Because one, from a flirting standpoint, it's going to be a lot more hot if you give details. But two, then from a standpoint of building this skill of communication and getting more of you want, the more you're specific, the more they're going to understand what they're doing so well of, and you're going to get more of that as well. So that's a really good, if you're like, I don't know what to
That's
say,
good. Yeah.
talk about like that foundation of what you love.
Mhm. So asking for what you want, but in the way of a flirt.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's pretty cool.
And
Exactly.
being detailed. So very
Yeah.
say more.
Yeah. That's the idea, right? It's like, it's like, okay, so if we're saying, I'll give you an example. So if I'm like, okay, I really like the way my partner kissed my neck, right? I'm not probably going to say something like, oh, love, that was just amazing the way you kissed my neck the other day. Nah, I mean, that's great to know, but like, nah, like, oh, the way your lips move slowly across the left side of my neck, my whole body started feeling tingles all over it. And I just felt myself relax into desire. And as you move your lips closer to mine, it was just amazing. Like that move, I just wanted you so bad. Something like that, right? Like that's like way more detailed than like, oh, I just like the way you kissed my neck the other day. So we want to give details. We want to talk about our body's expression of it. I had tingles all over. I felt my toes curling a little, whatever is true for you. And like, you might not remember all of these details. It doesn't have to be wild to start. And if you haven't had sex in a long time and you're like, where do I start if I haven't had sex? Think about the way they hug you. Think about the way they kiss you goodbye. Think about something that maybe happened 6 months ago that you missed, right? But if you're like, even if you're like, this has been a while, what ways are you still being intimate in your physical side in the present moment that are still really something that just like fills you with pleasure and joy? And start there.
Yeah. I think it's like, yeah. I think it's also, it reminds me of like just something that you kind of need to practice to get more comfortable with.
Yeah.
And it's hard, like we've tried to, I've put out on the blog and, like here are some examples, like really concrete examples here, because sometimes it can be hard for people to even think it up. Is there a resource? Is there a place where they can go? Is there any resource on your website or anywhere where they can go to just support in this way?
Yeah. I've thought about creating the same around like, here's like a list of like how you flirt. I don't have that yet, but if people do get my novelty checklist at mysexdoc.com, I will definitely like that is on my list as figuring out how to do this, because I don't want to do it in such a way where it's like, here's the statements.
That's right.
Just because I feel like it's like it falls short and it's hard for people to like grasp. So you know what would be really cool? I might work with my developer on this. I have a really cool developer that builds apps and all sorts of things for me. But I might see if we can like find a way where people could like insert like things they like. This is so cool where they insert it in and then it'll spit out based upon what they insert something unique to them. Oh, I'm going to talk to the developer.
Yeah,
love it.
Sounds good.
So if you guys download my novelty checklist, I will let you know when cool new things like this come out.
That's awesome.
So tell us a little bit about the novelty. I think you mentioned the yes/no checklist.
Yeah, that is the novelty checklist. And so that gives like all sorts of different ideas for like, how do you bring more emotional connection from a novelty place? How to bring more sexual connection. Like, so there's a few different categories you'll see. But one of the big things is like, okay, so taking this with your partner. So you get your list of like, I like this, they like that. Here's my yeses, here's their yeses. The most important thing about the checklist, though, is not just taking it and not just having your partner take it. It's really fun. It's a fun date night thing. Like, who doesn't love like a cool quiz? And so you get your checklist and you come together. Now, here's what's really important, because what can happen sometimes for couples when they do an activity like this, especially if they've never talked much about sex, is sometimes one person might have like a fantasy and they check something off that's like a fantasy of theirs. And the other person might be like horrified. They're like, how could my partner ever think this? Like, I think this is so gross and horrible. And so we really have to think about, and we have to have a plan prior to talking about the checklist of how we're going to talk about this, right? It's kind of like, okay, how are we going to respond how are we going to handle it if somebody gets so busy and doesn't respond to a flirt? We want to have a plan ahead of time for these things as much as possible, because when we have a plan, we have a strategy then of this is how we're going to handle it that is respectful to both people. So the conversation that I really encourage people to have is before they share their information is, how do you want me to respond? Here's a question. How do you want me to respond if there's something that shocks me that is on your list that I'm shocked and I would never do, right? How do you want me to respond? And so then we can hear from our partner, like, oh, if I have this thing that I want to try and you're going to be shocked by it, what I would love for you to say is, babe, that is just so beautiful. I'm like so touched to know that this is, true for you. Like that's not really interesting for me, but I'm so like, that turns me on just to know that is, that you're safe to tell me that. And that's just an example, right? We all have to make this like true for ourselves, but that's what we want to go into. So if there is that moment where it's like, oh, wow, this is surprising, I know how to say, hey, I'm not interested, in a way that's not going to shame the other person, make the other person shut down or feel wrong or any of that. So we just want to have that conversation ahead of time. And if we do, then I find that then we can build, because sometimes we find things in like the no or maybe list that's like, well, is there anything that could actually turn that into a yes? And oftentimes the no's are hard no's, but not always. Sometimes it's like, sometimes we can turn a no into a yes if it has this and this and this and this and this changed, it's like maneuvered about it. So it's the other fun thing about it is like it gives us more to talk about and actually starts working that muscle of talking about sex. Because now we're saying, okay, well, maybe I don't want to have sex in an airplane, but hey, here's another place that we could get this need of sex in public met or something like that. So we can start to have those kind of conversations, right? Like, what kind of tweaks can we still do to give you that feel? Or is there opportunity to role play this in a way that feels safe, that would still give you that fantasy? Or is it just a hard no and we have all of these other yeses that we get to celebrate together?
What about the fear that, the other partner may have, I won't do that with them, and so now they're going to seek out someone that will?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing to admit about that is like, if that was true, that they were going to seek somebody else to do that, well, if you're not doing that anyways, knowing about that is probably not going to change them seeking that out or not. So I think that's a really important thing to go in. It's like, we're not like, if they're going to seek somebody out because you're not going to do this thing, but you weren't doing that thing anyways, knowing about that, happening to know they're interested isn't going to change that because you weren't doing that. Right. So I think the bigger thing is like, when it comes to helping people stay in their committed relationships, what I see, at least in surveys, also in my work, but surveys being, I think, a great way to catch a much larger portion of data, is that when couples are talking about it and when they are open to finding things that work for both of them, most couples most of the time are not so attached to that one thing having to look that one way that they're gonna throw away the relationship over that. But talking about it and being open to a wide variety of novel things can help people stay more in their relationship. And I am not, I'm certainly not a therapist, right? I'm a doctor, I'm a sex educator, so I come at it from more that angle.
And I really love what you said earlier about like just acknowledging the trust. Like when we're saying, here's our desire, here's our, fantasy. And if the partner hears something that doesn't feel comfortable to them, that they can't even imagine doing, just acknowledging that their person trusts them and they can be vulnerable. So really focusing on that, it doesn't have to, right? It doesn't mean that, I think we got to be mindful of not shaming or criticizing another person, focus on the beauty of like that vulnerability and trust in another.
Well, exactly. And also I think the other important thing to acknowledge is there are some things that are hot in fantasy that are not in reality, or like that people are not interested in, and so just because somebody has a fantasy with something also doesn't 100% mean they want to do it in reality. And and I think a great example is bringing in another partner, bringing in a third, or partner swapping, or these kind of things. Like, that does work for some individuals. And there's a lot of people I talk to that love it from a standpoint of like, that's hot in my mind. But the thought, it's like in taking people through the activities around like, okay, well, imagine truly, your other, your partner doing this, or imagine all these different things that are more like the details and the realness of it. And we go into that. A lot of times people don't like realize like, oh yeah, I don't actually like how that feels or looks, but the idea of it is still hot in my mind, right? So I think that's the other thing to differentiate too, is some things that may come up when we're talking about novelty may sound hot, but in actuality, they're like, oh, they're just, they're hot for us to fantasize about. Maybe we can like talk about them and turn ourselves on. And just because we're fantasizing and talking about them, we can have a very clear boundary that this is fun and hot for our fantasy, but it's staying in fantasy world.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's where people get confused.
And also back to the fear, like, well, if this is a fantasy, it's something that can just stay in fantasy. It doesn't have to become reality, real life.
Exactly. And even in doing like a yes, no, maybe checklist, like, is another thing to bring in with talking about novelty around like, is this a yes? Like, I find this so hot, right? Or is this a yes? Is this a yes, I find this so hot, I want to do it? Or is this a yes, I find this hot, but I would never do it? Or yes, I find this hot, but you're like, I just want to role play with you and just play with the fantasy energy in it and never bring it into actual real life. Like, there's a lot of ways that we can use. And this is where I think like sex is play. This is like as adults, it's like when we're really bringing ourselves into the fullness of sex and pleasure and what it has the capacity to offer, it is like one place in adult life that there's like so much permission to play and fantasize in like all sorts of ways that most of us haven't played in like fantasy world since we were kids. And obviously as kids, it's, magic and witches and wizards and those kind of things. That's obviously very different, but it just allows us this ability to say, hey, I'm going to create this whole world. I'm going to create this whole vibe, and we're just going to play in it in whatever way we want. People will create scenes and what is that? What is that show on How to Build a Sex Room? Have you seen that on Netflix?
Yes.
So I think it's so fun. The woman that goes around and she like She interviews couples, as you've probably seen, and she's gets us a sense of like what's their edge and what they're like and what they're into. And then she builds them like this room that is both usually a combination of like who they are now, as well as like pushing them into like this slight edge of like, hey, I want to maybe experiment with that. And point being, like we don't have to go as far as building an entire sex room, although I think it's a great idea. But we can create scenes like that around like, hey, let me just push my edge here to play in this world that is different from the real world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think fantasy is something that really can add to, what we're already doing. I think it can, to dabble in there, to even explore. I encourage clients to do that all the time. Just like see what there might be something in there that really could enhance and add to what you already have.
And here's the other thing that I think is important to mention, which is particularly important for hetero couples because of the way the female desire process work versus the males. I think when people are more in homosexual relationships, they're more in alignment because they don't have that. They're more kind of on the same page because males, we see that desire begins in the mind and arousal follows. Females, arousal begins first and then desire follows. So desires of the mind and then arousals of the body. So if like for a man, this is how it looks. Like he sees his partner walk across the room and it's like, wow, that's yummy, right? So that's of the mind. He sees his partner and is like, oh yeah, that looks good. I want that, yummy. The mind says something. Then the body responds. And so then when the body responds and we see that blood flow to the genitals, and that's when an erection happens, for example, provided everything's going right. And so one of the problems that women run into is that we oftentimes think the mind is supposed to happen first, the desire. And we think like, wow, I'm not that interested in sex. Like my desire is really low. Well, for women, arousal comes first. Desire comes later. And this is where women, when they make love, may not be into it initially. And I'm like, well, we haven't done this in a while. We're just going to go for it anyways. This is important. 15 minutes in, they start to feel like, well, this actually feels kind of good. Like, I kind of like this. So now their arousal has kicked on. They're in their body and now their brain is kicked on. So first was all the sensations of their body. Now their body's feeling it. Then their brain kicks on and says, wow, this is actually feeling good. And then at the end, they might look at their partner and say something like, hey, why don't we do this more often? That was really great. Right. And I do see, sometimes for lesbian women, I see that this can come up because there is still we're still in this world where we think that desire is like all this one way. So sometimes there is still this unknown in lesbian couples of this. But I do find because of that mismatch of desire versus arousal, it tends to impact hetero couples the most because it's without knowing this, it's like hard for both people to be on the same page. And so what can help in those scenarios is for anybody that's dating a woman, like get her to bed and give her a sensual massage and just take sex off the table for a second and just help her get back into her body before we end up getting into, anything sexy. And it's so common, I find, that when we're not focused on the sex and we're just focused on touching and just pleasure and just like relaxing and not thinking about all the things we have to think about all day long, that mental desire will kick on later once we've given the physical arousal a moment to settle in.
So women kind of need to have that kickstart.
Correct.
Thinking of a dirt bike. You got to just like,
Yeah.
get it going.
And when I first came across this, it was like like doing this work, right? There's these moments where like it's gone for me around like, well, everything makes sense, right? You're like,
we need
so helpful for me because so many people I work with, like I thought for a long time there was something wrong with me. Like, why do I not have the desire the same way man does? Like, this really makes sense.
Yeah. This is great. So Dr. Diane, tell us, how can our listeners learn more? How can they get in touch with you? What resources?
Yeah, well, definitely go get my checklist that we've talked about several times. So that's at mysexdoc.com. I have a new book. It's on pre-sale now. I'm not sure when this episode is dropping, but it's on pre-sale now. So you can buy it now. It'll be coming out soon. And that is at wanttowantIt.com. So it's how to want more sex, be better at it, and get more of it. And so super easy, wanttowantIt.com, mysexdoc.com. And then I have a ton of other offerings. So you're always welcome to go to my main site, which is my Libido Doc, and find all my goodies on there. I have free stuff, I have paid stuff, all sorts of different things. So
amazing. Thank you so much. This was
Thank you.
so helpful. So much good information in here. So
thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
yeah. And thank you everyone for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Kisses. Bye. Bye.